Have you ever sat down after a long, hard day's work, poured yourself a nice cold pint of beer, and wondered, how was this made? What was the process? How does it get from this into this? Well, pour yourself a nice cold pint of beer, sit back and find out more about the alchemy of beer. Cheers. Arkells was founded in 1843 and prides itself on a traditional approach to producing beer.
Started in 1843. I'm the sixth generation of our same family to brew here. We've been brewing on this same site. We're surrounded by our brewery here. We've got an old brew house there, malting's there, which is barley treatment essentially to make it ready for beer. We've got warehousing behind us, and it began with my great grandfather, who was a farmer principally, as most breweries did really begin with agriculture and farming. Often breweries were established as sort of small offshoots of little farms where they wanted to use a bit of their excess barley or whatever to make a bit of beer. This is a long time ago though, and then it sort of got industrialized in the sort of 15th, 16th century. So this is before us, but we were definitely farmer brewers originally.
Arkells are proud of their history, but it's also the present that really matters. Arkells still produce beer in broadly the same way as they have done for the past 150 years.
Well, principally, we do it just in a more traditional fashion. So how we make our beer with this manual hands-on process in a Victorian steam tower brewery. That is an entirely unique way of making our beer. And what we do here then as Arkells as an overall business is we take our raw ingredients right from step one, so right from your barley. We don't grow barley, we don't grow hops. Sadly, we used to grow barley, not hops. We'll take that and then we'll turn it into beer. We're all the way through this brewing process. And then we package our beer as well here. So we've got a bottling line, and we've got kegging lines and cask racking lines. So we'll put all the finished beer after fermentation into barrels or bottles or kegs or cans. And then we sell it as well. So then we also, as a brewery, own the retail unit.
So now we're starting to understand a bit more about how beer is made. Although it depends on what sort of beer you're talking about. There are several varieties of beer, lager and ale, for example. But what links beer together is common ingredients. The key ingredients consisted across all, if not most beers, are barley, yeast, and hops. One brewery in Surrey prides itself on being one of the only breweries in the country to grow its own hops. The vast majority don't.
Hops are perennial plants, so it's constantly growing. Each year you don't put down a new seed or a new rhizome. The plant's in the ground, and post-harvest the previous year, it's you just encourage it to rest. So in around November time, you just cut it back down to the earth, basically, and just try to encourage the crop to sleep. It's still producing shoots at that time, but hopefully the frost wipes that out. Hop, you want to try and remain dormant as long as possible because you want it to conserve its energy. As you can see, the hops actually grow to quite a height, and through that the crop needs lots of vigour. So you try to persuade it and battle against nature to stop the crop from growing until around about April time, and then the shoots will reappear in May, and then has about 6 weeks up until the Midsummer's Day, the 21st of June, to reach the tops. So it grows about 3 inches a day.
Traditionally, it was used for a number of things. One, it was a preservative. So you've probably heard the expression IPA that you see these days. And IPAs were about heavily hopped beers as a preservative when the beer was being transported from the British Empire over to India. Now, why we use hops in modern beers, two main reasons: bitterness and aroma. There's lots of other reasons, but they're the two main reasons. So the oils in the hops, once you put them in the boil of the actual brewing process, that will convert those chemicals in it, and it'll give you a bitterness to the beer. What we also do as well is we want some of those oils to give it some lovely aromas, so we add them different times in the brewery to give you different characteristics. So we add them very late in the brew house, and that will give you aroma where you might not want bitterness. What we also do is we add them further down the process in fermenter, even conditioning and further down. And that is what we call dry hopping. And again, that's for giving you that aroma in the beer.
This is barley, an essential ingredient in beer.
Barley is a crop that is harvested every summer. To make beer, the barley grains are steeped in water until they germinate.
Barley will be delivered here, malted barley will be delivered here, depending on the different varieties and colours we need. We'll then mill it, which is crushing the barley to break out the sugars, because you've got to get the sugar. The only reason you use barley principally, as opposed to wheat or oats or anything else as your principal ingredient, is because it has the right kind of sugar. Malted barley has sugar inside of it we'll be able to break down in our brewing process, because it's starch as opposed to maltose, which is, small chains of sugar basically. If you remember school chemistry, you've got sort of long chains of sugar, which is starch, then it breaks down into maltose and dextrose and things like that. We want the small chains. So we break it down in our breweries. We get the starch from our barley, we break it down, we extract it, and the colour and the protein, which is a bit more flavour out of the barley. We then add water to it, so we can then dilute it out, leave the grain behind. We then got a liquid. We then boil that liquid, which will then sterilise it to make it safe, obviously, and remove some more of the proteins you don't want, which helps the beer in stability at the end of it when it's in the bottle and in the glass.
So I'm here at the Double Barrel Brewery in Reading to learn more about the beer making process across an entire day. Let's come and take a look.
A mash tun is used for mixing ground malt, otherwise known as grist. This process is called mashing.
So initially we're just flooding the mash tun here with some hot water, and that's just going to warm it up ready so we don't lose too much heat as the grain and the water mixes.
How long does this process usually take?
Once the grain's flowing, it will take 20 to 30 minutes or so. We want to mix it slowly and thoroughly so we get a really consistent texture as the grain flows in. So I can see there that the plates at the bottom of the mash tun are covered. Now I'm going to start to release barley to mix with the water, which is just mixing in this hydrator here. So as you can see, there's a mix of barley and hot water flowing into the mash tun. There's about 2.8 litres of water for every kilogram of grain. That ensures a really good texture. And here I'm just adding acids and salts, and they will correct the water chemistry, which we adjust to suit the water profile of the beer that we're making. And here's the heavy bit. Just need to start to move that grain around just to distribute it evenly. Like rowing through porridge. This is called the sparge. This is where we're rinsing any residual sugar off of the grain that might be stuck onto there, just to make sure we get all of the sugar that we need over into the beer in the end.
And what sort of temperature does this reach?
So this is running at about 77 to 79 degrees. It needs to not be hot enough to burn anything, because otherwise you'll get some unpleasant flavours from that. But hot enough to kill any enzymes that might still be working, so we know that the process is definitely finished.
And is this essentially just to make sure the beer is sort of safe to drink then?
No, it'll be fully boiled after this. It just keeps a consistent amount of extract going through from the grain into the end beer.
As you would expect, weather has a crucial role in all aspects of farming, and this extends to beer, because bad weather equals bad beer.
Most important impact of the aggressive sort of season we've had this summer, for instance, with a lot of rain in August, is the raw materials. So our barley harvest will be poorer as a result. It was a good summer initially in June and May, and then it got very wet in July and August, which has meant that the harvest has been more difficult. The grain isn't quite so big and sugary, which is what we want. It's a bit more sort of emaciated. You get a lot more what we call nitrogen in there, which is very hard to remove from the barley, so you basically get cloudy beer, so it's harder to get the beer nice and bright and clean. and essentially you need possibly more barley to produce the same amount of beer, just because the yield is not so good, the sugar yield isn't so good, and probably it doesn't taste as good. You know, a better harvest, a better sunnier harvest, is going to produce a more sparkly flavoured beer. There's no doubt about it. You know, a good harvest makes good beer, and a bad harvest makes bad beer. But our job is to make sure you don't notice the difference. So we'll use more barley, or we'll blend and change the way we might run our ingredients. But the barley won't arrive in the breweries from this harvest until sort of January, February. So it has to go through some processing first, packaging, drying, all that sort of thing. So it'll be about February when we notice the difference.
Loading the grain into the auger. So behind me there's a big hopper that we fill with grain ready for the next day's brew. That takes about 500 kilograms of grain. It's just a nice way of getting it to a good height so then we can mix it into the mash later on.
And how long does this process last?
It takes around 45 minutes to an hour. It's quite a slow mill. It's not actually, the time isn't a particularly important factor here. It's just a case of moving it with the equipment that we have available.
So that's the common ingredients of beer covered. But what exactly is the difference between ales and lagers?
We're adding yeast into the beer. This is the stage at which it officially becomes beer. Up until this point, it's known as wort. This yeast is going to eat the sugar that we've released during the mashing process, and that will make alcohol and CO2. So for today's beer, we're using an ale yeast. This will sit on top of the wort in the fermenter as it eats the sugar, and that's referred to as top cropping. So all ales are fermented with top cropping yeast. Whereas with a lager, that will use a yeast that sits on the bottom of the tank as it ferments, and that's called bottom cropping. So all lager yeast is then bottom cropping. Ale yeast tends to be done a lot warmer, around 18 to 22 degrees Celsius, whereas lager yeasts prefer much cooler temperatures, and they take a bit longer to ferment the beer because of that. What we're doing here is we're adding more hop pellets to the fermenter when it's finished fermenting. And what that does is really lock in the really strong aromas from the hops into the finished beer, like infusing tea. So here we're adding about 45 kilograms of hop pellets to 5,500 litres of beer, and that's going to give it a really, really juicy tropical aroma. These are Citra hops grown in the United States in Washington. As the name would suggest, they taste very strongly of citrus zest and tropical fruit. Really nice hop, and it's the lead hop in our flagship beer, so we buy a lot of it. Last bag. Now we need to seal the tank as quickly as we can, just to prevent any aroma losses. And keep all the CO2 in there. There we go, tank sealed, ready to rock. So we'll let that infuse into the beer now for 2 days, and then we'll chill the beer down and we'll dump the dry hops out of the bottom before we fully chill it and carbonate it.
And does this process differ depending on if you're making an ale or a lager?
Yeah, massively. So for our really hoppy craft ales, we'll dry hop just about every one, and we don't tend to dry hop lagers at all. The flavour in lagers is much more subtle, and you don't want that kind of really impactful tropical flavour that we get from this. So here we're canning our lager. So if you look at the machine, my colleague Chip here is loading cans on. And he's putting them through what we call a twist rinse, which is just rinsing the cans. And it's also printing the date code on the bottom of the cans. And as the cans enter the machine, Those first 5 heads there are purging the cans of carbon dioxide, and that prevents the contents of the can from being damaged during the fill process by any oxygen ingress. Those next 5 can heads are then filling the cans with beer. We're having to make sure there's a nice little peak of foam. Just you'll see as they pass through the lid chute, that lid then slaps that foam off of the can, and that knocks any oxidized beer off of the top. And then in the next section, we're just sealing that lid onto the can, and then for the rest of the line, it's rinsing the cans with water, then drying them and applying a label. So here we're just filling key kegs. They're a one-way recyclable plastic keg, which we can send to a variety of our customers. They're quite cheap to ship because they're very light, and you can export them as well without running into any problems. So I'm just hooking up a coupler on the bottom of the keg here. Now it's got 2 outlets, or an inlet and an outlet, and I can vent the gas out of the gap between the bag and the keg whilst sending beer in. It's very important to do this at the right rate, because that then controls how quickly the keg will fill, which in turn dictates how much weight you get into the keg. Because if you fill too quickly, you get a lot of foam, which obviously isn't beer. Yeah, this one's now full, because you can hear the gas has stopped coming out. We'll just turn off the beer line, turn off the gas line, disconnect the head. Now just take the keg over to some scales and weigh it. So yeah, we're aiming for 31.2 kilos, so this has got a bit of extra weight in it, but it's no problem. It's not underfilled. So we're good.
I'll be honest, before making this documentary, I never really thought about the process that goes into making it. But it's genuinely interesting how beer is made, the months of process, the graft, the precision that goes into every single drop. So I suppose the next time you do find yourself drinking a pint of beer, you now know exactly how it is made. Cheers.